All right. So I think some of you joined us right after I introduced myself. So for those of you who didn't catch it, my name is Lena. I'm an environmental educator over at ecomaine. And so ecomaine is the one that's sponsoring this program tonight. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background about who we are and what we do. So in Gray, you are one of our owner communities. So that means that you partially own our nonprofit, and you also help us to manage the municipal solid waste of our 20 owner communities, in addition to 50 other main communities in terms of municipal solid waste or your trash and your recycling. And as it pertains to the program tonight, we are what we call a collection facility for food waste, industrially composted food waste. So we'll be talking about that and what that kind of means tonight. But our main capacity here is to provide trash and recycling facilities and processes to these communities here. So Gray, like I said, is one of the owner communities. So uniquely actually to Gray, you are only sending us your trash. You, I'm sure, as you know, do all of your recycling down at the transfer station. I myself am a Gray resident, so I'm also pretty familiar with that. If you guys have questions about recycling or trash, I'm more than happy to answer those for you. So you can ask them along the way or at the end. And then I also wanted to mention for New Gloucester residents, you do not have a contract with us, so I can't answer specifics about any of your processes. I can give you a general knowledge as to what's happening, and I can also probably guide you into the right directions for recycling, but I can't answer specifics on that. But I can give you general knowledge and things that would be applicable to everyone. So as we go, please let me know if you have any questions, and you can store them in your brain for the end as well. We'll have some time there too. So just again, a little brief on what we do here. These are our 3 facilities. We do have a recycling center. So for folks that send us for recycling, it's a single sort process. So like at the Gray transfer station, that's what we call source separated, where you're separating out, you, the resident, are responsible for separating out cardboard, paper, metal, glass, and so on. Whereas we are a single sort facility. So we take all of those items in one bin, one truck, one silver bullet if you do a drop off with us, and we are the people that sort it out. And so once we sort those items out, we bale it up into bales of cardboard, glass, not glass, we don't bale up glass, but plastic, metal, and paper, and we sell those commodities to manufacturers who make something new out of them. So we don't do any of that ourselves, but we do sell it to the folks that do that. And just an asterisk, because we've been getting that question a lot, we do new things actually do get made out of our materials. They don't go and sit in a landfill, and they do not go and sit overseas. We use mostly domestic, almost, I would say 90% domestic markets. And we've followed our items down the line and know that they do get made into new things. So just an asterisk on that. We do have a lot of questions on that lately. So at any rate, we take about 35,000 tons of recycling annually and approximately 175,000 tons of trash annually. Those, of course, fluctuate, and this year is definitely an anomaly. So we don't really know what 2020 will look like for us in terms of tonnage, but we are taking about 1/3 of Maine's trash and recycling. So for waste to energy, that is a process in which we combust our trash. We use the steam in that process from the combustion to generate electricity. We fuel all of our facilities without electricity. We have 2 electric vehicles, and we're about to get 2 electric garbage trucks. And all of those will be fueled by that electricity, in addition to 15,000 residential homes. So we're pretty proud about that capacity and being able to not only decrease the size of the things that we're putting into a landfill, also making them chemically inert, which is great. So they're not releasing methane, and also generate some electricity. So just a note on landfills, because what we're going to be talking about tonight does certainly impact landfills in Maine and then throughout the country and throughout the world. Landfills can be pretty detrimental to the environment, as I'm sure you all know. They occupy valuable land, especially in Maine. We don't want to be taking away any more of our wild and preserved lands to turn into landfills. You know, we have so much beautiful and really precious open space. We want to keep it that way. And like I mentioned, they do release methane when you're putting raw trash into a landfill, as they do more north. And then there are a handful of municipalities that still have their own landfills, like Gray had their own landfill back in the day. There are a few that still have them as well. But in addition, any landfill has the potential to harm nearby water systems. So there's always a threat to that, though. There are a ton of landfill technologies and sciences that go into place to help go against that. But of course, nothing is perfect, so things happen. And of course, especially with a raw trash landfill, it doesn't really happen at our Asheville because, like I said, we're just putting ash there. So vectors and wildlife aren't really attracted to ash, but they will be attracted to raw trash, of course. And as with any landfill, they take a lot of money to buy the land, to fill it, and then to cap it up. It takes thousands and thousands of dollars. So what's great about our waste to energy process is that it's about a 90% reduction in size for that trash. And so it allows us to fill our landfill at a lot slower capacity and rate than it would if we were putting raw trash there. So that's a relief for us on our end. And there are other facilities in Maine that are doing the same thing, the waste to energy process, to reduce the size of things going into the landfill, which is awesome. And just a brief overview. So ecomaine was founded in the 70s by a few of our owner communities today. We expanded out in the 80s to our 20 owner communities that are still our owner communities now. Gray is one of them. And then in the early 2000s, late 90s, we started recycling and doing the single sort recycling in the 2006 timeframe. And so a lot of our communities then, especially the owner communities, signed on recycling at that time. But of course, Gray was the one holdout and is still doing their own thing, which is awesome. It's really great to see. I should mention, I'm on the Gray Recycling Committee. So I do a bit in town to help out with that process and to help the guys at the transfer station. So if you have any questions about that, I can answer those for you as well. So like I was mentioning with landfill and such, at ecomaine and then DEP, the Maine DEP also relies on the waste hierarchy to help make decisions in terms of waste. And it's something we've created to add to the 3 R's. So we all know the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, but it's not that simple, especially when you're thinking about a whole town or a whole state's waste. We'd like to add the latter 3 in: compost and digestion, which is what we'll be focusing on tonight, waste to energy and landfill, to kind of help in the larger decision-making process for an entire state, right? So we have a lot of decisions that need to be made, especially when you're thinking about the waste of all of these communities. And it's really helpful to have a guiding theory and moral capacity almost to help guide those decisions. So over at ecomaine, we really pride ourselves on providing comprehensive long-term solid waste solutions in safe and environmentally friendly manners, but also in a way that's economically sound. And the huge part of what we do is our environmental education and our waste education, kind of bringing more of that into the picture here. So I'm gonna add one more person here. So that's our background here on ecomaine. And just to give you a little bit of a look. Hold on just a second, that is not supposed to be making noise. So just to give you guys a perspective here, on the left, hopefully you can hear me over the noise here. On the left of your screen here is what our trash looks like. So that has food waste in it, of course, because most folks do throw food into their regular trash. And on the right, what I just played for you is the combustion of trash that we do at ecomaine. So when you are throwing food waste into your trash, it goes and it sits in this pile with everything else that people throw away: carpets, furniture, mattresses. Mostly a lot of trash today is plastic packaging that can't be recycled because not all plastic can be recycled. So it's a lot of that stuff. There's some metal in there. And so once it goes from this pile here to the fire, it burns at 2000 degrees approximately for about 4 hours. So it's a complete combustion. But as you can imagine, if we're burning our trash, what we would think of food waste when it sits there, especially when you're thinking of your trash bin, maybe you have a residential pickup and you have a trash bin that you keep outside, it gets kind of nasty in there. And in the bottom, it can get kind of gooey. We call it the trash juice. That doesn't help the fire burn very well, right? So we actually, over at ecomaine, we call food waste wet waste most of the time, because that's exactly what it is. It's wet, and it kind of makes everything else wet. And so we actually have to do a lot of work in terms of recycling to get food waste out of recycling. Some folks think that you can throw food waste right in your recycling bin and it hurts the recycling a lot because it's wet. And we, of course, don't want anything to be wet in our recycling. But the same goes for our trash. I mean, it's great to have an outlet to put your trash, but we would very much love to see food waste come out of the trash completely, because it would allow our fires to burn more efficiently, right? When we're adding food waste into those fires, it doesn't burn as efficiently because we're almost like putting out the fire a little bit, not a ton, every time we add a little bit more of that wet waste. So that's part of the reason why composting and what we call diversion of food waste out of the trash is so important. So I wanted to take a look at what your trash and recycling should look like just really quickly before we jump in. So I've been really lucky working at ecomaine. I'm able to take my food waste out of my trash because I can bring it to work. And so that means my trash right now is just non-recyclable plastic packaging and what we would call biohazard. So I have a puppy. She does pee on the floor from time to time. All of those paper towels I'm throwing in the trash because, of course, we don't want to put any of that type of what we would call a biohazard. There would be diapers, needles, anything that has any sort of animal or human waste on it. We don't want that in the recycling or in the compost. We want that in the trash. So that non-recyclable plastic and then the biohazards are really only thing that make up my trash now, which is awesome. Another thing that's really awesome about that is my trash doesn't really smell at all. And so I bring trash over to the transfer station probably like once a month, once every 2 months or so, just because that's all that's in there. And it's honestly been really great. So the goal here, when we're really looking at our trash, and I would really encourage you to do a trash audit at your home. If you have a tarp, you can kind of dump your trash out and really just sort it out and see what's in there. It sounds kind of yucky. You can put gloves on if you want, but we do it at schools all the time. And it's really fun way to get to know your trash and what is in there. And so our goal is to get all of the useful items, things that could go to Goodwill, or things that even if you think it might have no use to you, it might have a use to somebody else. So there are also really cool groups called Buy Nothing groups, which is a complete giving economy situation. And I'm working very hard to start one in Gray-New Gloucester. And so if we were able to add that to our community, it would just be another outlet for things like, for example, something that I know I could get into a Buy Nothing group is I need a printer cord, right? And I'm sure people have cords laying in their house all over the place, and they would probably just be ending up in the trash, but that's something that I could divert from their trash because I need it in my house. So useful items should really be taken out of the trash whenever possible. Organics, of course, is what we're going to talk about today, and then recyclables. A lot of folks aren't aware of all the extent to which things are recyclable. So there do end up being like cardboard boxes even, and some plastics in the recycling that could otherwise be what we would call diverted. So then when we're looking at our recycling, particularly in Gray, we're thinking just cardboard, paper, metal, and glass. And plastic. I actually want to asterisk that Gray is no longer able to recycle their glass. So if you have any glass items at home, I would strongly recommend you reuse them. Literally any sort of use you can find for them, I would do that before you bring it to the transfer station, because they're no longer able to afford glass recycling. You can also, alternatively, if you would like to learn about our drop-off locations, if you have glass recycling, you can bring it to us at ecomaine at one of our drop-off locations. But at any rate, those 5 items are the only things that are fully recyclable in Gray, and then also with us at ecomaine. There are some companies that are a little bit different. I know Casella is one that's local. I have a strong feeling that that is who New Gloucester partners with for their recycling, in which case it would be very similar, the items that could be recycled and cannot be. So as we dive into food waste here, I also wanted to bring up the food waste hierarchy here. This is not something that we created, but we do like to use this and to use it as a teaching tool. So of course, when we're talking about food waste, we want to prevent it first. Like we have reduce at the top of the waste hierarchy, we also want to have reduce at the top of the food waste hierarchy, right? So that would be source, what we're terming here, source reduction. So that would be when you're going to the grocery store buying only what you need. And when the farmers are growing food at the farm, really trying to hammer in what is capable of them to sell and to move on to the next stage into the markets, and trying to avoid some of that source reduction or the waste that comes straight from the process, straight from the grocery stores, straight from your home, the things that you're not able to eat before they go bad, that type of thing. And of course, there actually are a ton of different systems in Maine and throughout the country to feed people in need with food waste. It's a bit harder to do, of course, because we do have a lot of standards for food, of course, to keep us safe and to make sure that we're eating food that is safe. So it's a little bit harder to get food diverted to folks that are in need because they of course need to have the same quality that you would be buying in the grocery store. So that is one that is really ever present in the US, but it can be a little bit harder for people on the end of having the food and needing to get rid of it to actually do that. So things like feeding animals can be a really great option because you don't need to have as high a quality food waste to do that. You can have some veggies that are bruised and maybe a little smelly, and they can still go out to food to feed pigs or something like that. Or in Maine, they can be used for bear bait, you know, you never know. And you also have industrial uses for food. So something that I want to mention, and we're going to come back to, is bioplastics. So this is something that we're seeing a lot. I just heard the other day that Dunkin' Donuts is starting to use what they're terming biodegradable straws. So there is a lot of miscommunication and misnomers about these different terms, specifically in bioplastics, and who can accept them, what you can actually do with them. And so I wanted to break that down for you all because specifically in the Portland area, they are everywhere now, and the labeling is not great. A lot of times, if you didn't know the recycling industry and if you didn't know the plastics industry, you would have no idea that you're even using a bioplastic. But food waste will also go into creating these bioplastics. So they're a mixture of polymers and basically the starch from food waste. I'm not entirely well-versed in the process, but I do know that some of the food waste gets diverted there. Not so much in Maine. I don't think we don't have the industrial facilities to create bioplastics, but we do have the composting facilities, which is the next one there. And of course, at the end, we do have landfill and incineration as the very last stage. We would really love to see it get diverted in any of these ways before then. So I want to preface this, all of my pictures will come up here eventually. Before we dive into backyard basics, I want to just tell you guys that I am not a master composter, as you like to call them in Maine. So I am not your expert. I do have a slide that does have the experts on there, but I am more well-versed in industrial composting and kind of breaking that down for folks. So if you'd like more information on backyard composting, I do have some ways that you can get involved with that and different information there. But I'm more giving the perspective on why composting is important, what impact that has in the waste industry, and specifically in these industrial plastics and the compostable, biodegradable plastic world. I definitely want to dive into that today too. But basically in your backyard, there's a very specific line between what is compostable and what is not. So really on the do's of backyard composting, you have all of your veggies and all of your fruits. You have most breads. Most of them are just typically like flour, water, and salt. But you really cannot compost any sort of animal product other than eggshells. Eggshells are good to go, but anything else, milk, dairy, cheeses, meats, even bones, and fish cannot be composted fully in your backyard. So, I mean, I know in Maine, it's pretty common to have a pile that you don't intend on using. If you want to throw that type of food waste in there, that's not a huge issue. It will eventually break down, but in terms of like backyard composting, we're thinking about the compost that you could use in your garden. And you wouldn't be able to use those, the soil with meat and dairy products in there because it wouldn't be safe for your veggie production, or the stuff that would come out the other end would have the bacteria in there as well. So we want to just be careful about that. So transfer station, every transfer station is different. I'm fairly certain that Gray does not accept campfire ashes. We just got a question in about campfire and wood ashes and such. Again, totally safe to put your wood ashes out in the yard. I wouldn't use use that in your compost to grow food with, is basically the distinction there. I am not entirely certain on what Gray does with campfire ashes at their transfer station. Like I said, every transfer station is different. So if you don't happen to live in Gray, it would be worth a call over either to their transfer station office or to your town hall just to see if there are different processes. In Gray, we do accept yard waste, which they use to create compost and almost like a mulch soil situation for residents to use for free, which is great. That's also pretty common. But it's always worth a check to see what is going on over at your transfer station in terms of ashes. But we also, so I also wanted to make an asterisk here about pizza boxes. We had gotten some misnomers in the past that the grease on a pizza box makes it non-recyclable. And they've actually done hard, like peer-reviewed research on this, and that it is not a contaminant to the recycling process. So in Gray and at ecomaine, you can recycle pizza boxes unless they are like seriously drenched to the point where you could like bend it almost. Like it's really like sagging down with grease. I don't think that that's very common, but if that's the case, I probably would compost it before I would recycle it. But otherwise, if you would rather compost them, you are more than welcome to do that. They do, of course, take a little bit longer to break down, so you just want to be aware of that when you do that. But at any rate, I also wanted to asterisk here that dog poop is also not recyclable, compostable if you are planning on growing things with that compost. Oh, great. So it looks like there may be metal cans near the compactor, which is where you would dump your trash at the Gray transfer station for wood stove ashes. And that I am entirely unsure of what they do with those. So I cannot answer that question for you, but Randy, who is the manager down in the transfer station, I'm sure could. So if you want, we're more curious about that, I'm sure he could answer that for you. So a little bit more on backyard composting. I think most folks are aware that you do need to have the right ratio of green stuff, which is like your veggies and your plant trimmings, like anything that is like in actual color green, your grass clippings and trimmings and your flowers. Those are all termed green, and you would want to have less of those than you have for brown. So it's about 1-to-2 ratio, making up like 3 parts. And so the brown would be the dried leaves, paper towels or napkins. You can also compost in your backyard, with an asterisk that you would have to not have used them for any of the things that are not compostable. So that would be, probably wouldn't want them drenched in bacon grease. You wouldn't want them covered in butter or eggs or anything like that. You also wouldn't want them to have human waste or pet waste on them. And you also wouldn't want to have used them for cleaning with cleaning products. Those are, of course, are not recyclable and typically have a lot of chemicals that you wouldn't want in your soil for growing some veggies. So those you would want to stick out of there, but you can put some nice clean ones that you just dusted something off with or cleaned up some water with or what have you. And the brown can also be wood chips, shredded paper, hay, those types of things are all termed brown. Cardboard is actually kind of in the middle. It's not really either. And like I said, it does take a while to break down. So at any rate, you do need to have that ratio, which is why I I wouldn't necessarily say that backyard composting is the most efficient way to divert food waste from your household waste. Most of us do eat meat and dairy products, which of course are just going to sit in the trash if we aren't industrial composting those wastes. So in addition to that, like if you were completely vegan and you didn't have any of those wastes and you just had veggies and that type of food waste, and you didn't have to worry about any of that, you would still have an inundated amount of food waste compared to the brown waste that you have, most likely, unless you have like an completely unlimited supply of dried leaves or wood chips or what have you. You would most likely not have enough green or brown material to completely offset the green material, which is why you probably would need to compost industrially to fully divert your food waste. And in addition to that, when we're thinking about backyard composting, before you add more green, you need to have that amount of brown, but you also need to have some movement and composting of what was there prior. So that also being said, typically your compost cannot compost quick enough to effectively degrade what you had there before you add more in. So in that way, backyard composting has proven not to be the best option for diverting all of your food waste. And just also because we're in Maine, you also have to figure out what to do with it in the winter, right? You can add some stuff to it, but you could also assume that the more you add, there's not much going on there. So you really would need to have a ton of brown stuff, and you also would just need to assume that nothing's going to compost until the weather starts to turn up again. There would be some movement there, but it wouldn't be enough to fully allow for you to keep adding and adding and adding, if that makes sense. So what is the difference between industrial composting and the pile that I have in my backyard? The major difference here is heat. So like we heat our trash when we burn it down at ecomaine, they also heat compost when they are doing it industrially. And I'm going to break down the entire process, but that major difference between backyard composting and industrial composting is the heat specifically to 140 degrees. When they heat that food waste and they add in some other stuff as they heat it, and they actually heat it for 2 weeks straight, 2 to 4 weeks straight, depending on the facility, they allow the bacteria and all of those other things in, like, for example, the meat products and the dairy products to fully break down and to fully degrade. So those are no longer an issue or a potential issue in the material. So just in case you would want like a full explanation as to what industrial composting is, this is here. I can read it to you so you don't have to actually go through the process of reading it, but it essentially is a biological process where microorganisms break down organic material without oxygen. So that's why we call it anaerobic digestion. I find that term to be really intimidating, and people don't have any idea what I'm talking about when I'm just mentioning it, which is why we tend to stick with industrial composting, because then you can at least get a grasp as to what I'm talking about. But in the process of anaerobic digestion, of course, because there is wet waste there, methane and other gases are produced. And in that process, they're able to also generate electricity from the methane and the gases that are released by the digesters as they're working. And the products of the industrial composting and anaerobic digestion, in this case, some facilities are a little different, but in this case, you would get a little bit of electricity. You would mostly get heat, right? And then you have fertilizer, and you actually have two different types of fertilizer. One is dry and one is wet. The wet is a liquid fertilizer that they use for crops. They spray it on the crops. And then they also have a dry product. It's less of a fertilizer and typically more frequently used as animal bedding. And specifically at ecomaine, we contract with AgriCycle to, which is out of Exeter, Maine, to take our food waste. So I'm going to be speaking mostly to AgriCycle just because that's who I'm most familiar with and who is most applicable here. But there are other facilities that do the same process or the same process, but a little bit differently. For example, if you're in the Portland area, you'll probably have heard of Garbage to Garden, and we compost it. they're a little bit different because they actually turn out like the brown compost that you're thinking of, like a soil type of thing on the other end. At AgriCycle, they do less of that. They make the liquid fertilizer and then they make the animal bedding because they do, they're a fully functional cattle farm. So they use those processes in that way at their facility. But at any rate, in addition to those 3 products, there also are biogases that are created and are turned into natural gas and transportation fuels, and which I'm a little bit less familiar with, but it does happen. I'm pretty sure that AgriCycle uses them themselves, but I'm not entirely positive on that. And so, like I mentioned, anaerobic digestion, if you want to get into the particulars, is greener than just composting in your backyard because it completely eliminates greenhouse gases from the atmosphere because they're completely contained, and they actually use them to create energy off of them instead of emitting them. So just like anything else that's degrading, your backyard compost heat also creates natural gases and some other emissions that would be emitted. Of course, it's at a very slow rate, so you wouldn't notice them. It's not a huge issue, but if you want to get into the particulars, it is different and a little bit greener. So we had a question come in. Added a lot of grass, sod, and soil to compost bin in 2019 and 2020 when creating new garden beds. Can all this extra sod and soil help with infuse necessary bacteria and that 2/3 to 1/3 ratio? I would say definitely. I can't necessarily speak to the bacteria. I don't think it still would be safe to add in animal products or dairy products because we're talking about the heat. Your backyard compost pile is never going to get to the heat that you would need to fully degrade those types of bacteria that could be present in those materials. That being said, with your green veggies and your other materials that are safe to backyard compost, I think that would totally be perfect for that 2/3 to 1/3 ratio. So to dive a little bit deeper into anaerobic digestion here, there are a few outlets for this process. There are quite a few towns now in Maine that have exception facilities. So they would basically have a toter like that top left picture there, or a set of toters at the transfer station. They have them in Brownfield and then in a handful of other towns throughout Maine. And they're just in addition to everything else that you would dispose of at your transfer station, which is great. And that's honestly something that I'm vying for in Gray. I'd love to see that happen in the near future. And specifically being across from a Hannaford is a very privileged location to be in if you're talking about a transfer station looking to compost, because Hannaford's already contract with AgriCycle to take their food waste. So it's very easy, and it also means that it's cheaper for the town. But at any rate, so you're able to dispose of these at certain transfer stations. In Gray, I don't believe we qualify for any of the curbside pickup processes. We may for garbage to garden, depending on where you live in Gray-New Gloucester, but I don't believe so. I think we're just kind of outside of their range. Any closer to Portland and you're able to get that curbside compost pickup. But I think we're just a little bit too far for them. So at this time right now, there are drop-off locations available, which I'll have on a later slide for food, industrially composted food waste. And like I said, I don't believe that curbside is available in Gray, but if you live elsewhere, it's definitely something I would look into. So I wanted to break down here the process for industrial composting. And we're gonna start at the top where that garbage pail is. So you first would collect the food waste at your home or your business, for example, and in some sort of fashion, your food waste would typically get brought to what they call a collection facility, which in some cases is us at ecomaine. For example, the town of Falmouth has drop-off locations for compost that get brought to us, in addition to a few other towns. And in addition to that, there are also other options. Like I mentioned, the curbside pickup, which would also get brought to a holding facility before it gets brought to AgriCycle. And there are also community-based drop-off locations as well. So once it gets transferred into the agri-cycled truck, it gets brought to their location at Exeter. And there, the food waste is processed through a depackager, which some recycling facilities have. We do not have one at ecomaine, but they do have them in most food waste and anaerobic digestion facilities, because they're able to rip open bags and a few other containers and empty the food waste out of them. So if you have, for example, a bag of carrots that has gone bad in your fridge, you're able to throw that right into the compost toter, because that debagger will debag those for you. That process is really helpful, and it also allows you to kind of eliminate a little bit of the process of emptying everything out when you're composting yourself in your home. That also means that when you're composting and bringing things to a drop-off location, you can do so in a bag. So for example, I use plastic bags that I've gotten at the store or through shipping products to my house or what have you, and put all of my compost in those. You're more than welcome to dump it out into the bin if you want to keep reusing your bag, but you don't have to do that. So once it goes through the debagger, those two little red circular buildings there are the digesters. And that's where the microorganisms reproduce by feeding on the compost in there. The compost that you are collecting and generating in your home is mixed with cow manure. And it's basically the most smelly slurry of stuff that you've ever come across. And the microorganisms are added to that, and they love it. It's their favorite place to be ever. And they are able to reproduce and feed on the organic matter in that process, and still be heated at the same time. So the heat and the microorganisms and the decomposition happening all create biogas. And that biogas becomes fuel for the system. Like I said, AgriCycle does things with it, to which I am not entirely certain, but they do use that for heating, to help with the heating. I'm sure they use it to restart the heating process if it has gone out. That's what we do at ecomaine. We use natural gas to do that. And they also have power units that they use that biogas for. And so, like I mentioned earlier, there is also, through the heating process, electricity that is generated, in addition to the burning of methane and a few other gases that are produced. And that electricity all is sold back to the grid, which helps to reduce the fossil fuel emissions and make the whole process a little bit closer to carbon neutral. And so, like I mentioned, there are two different products. The compost slurry of stuff, once it's been in there for a few weeks, goes through what they call a bioseparator, which is really just a fancy word for separating the liquids and solids out. And so the liquid material, like I said, is used as cropland fertilizer. So that is sprayed onto crops that help to feed the cows and the cattle that they have there. And that solid material is used as animal bedding, and in some cases as compost, but just typically it's used as animal bedding. And then the entire process keeps going. And of course, the cow manure is collected from the cows that they have there at AgriCycle, and added to the slurry there. So I wanted to break that down so that we can kind of get a better idea as to what anaerobic digestion and industrial composting can look like, and typically does look like. And so I wanted to also dive into what you can and cannot compost industrially. It is a little bit different because of that heat, like I mentioned. So you can compost all of the dairy and meat products that you have. You don't want to put in like a whole deer. If you were to hit one on the side of the road, you would not want to put in a whole deer. But if you have some venison left over or steak left over or what have you, it's safe to put that in. In addition, it's also safe to put in anything that's been cooked with those items. So in backyard composting, they do not recommend adding fats and oils to those. You are more than welcome to do that with your industrial composting. In addition to sauces that might have animal products in them, coffee, of course, is okay in any sort of compost, your backyard as well. And all of the fruits and veggies that would be in your backyard compost are, of course, okay to add in. And like I mentioned, packaged food is okay to an extent. If you have damaged or outdated food in your fridge that you've never got around to eating, that is a-okay to put into your compost, but they do not want any empty cardboard or plastics. I know we talked about how cardboard can be composted, but they don't have the capacity to add that into their compost at an anaerobic digester. It just doesn't work well. It doesn't go through the process and the machinery well. So they don't want you to add in anything that doesn't have food waste in it. And so to dive into the don'ts, of course, anything that has chemicals on it is not all right. So that would mean all of your yard waste, they will not accept. So all of your shrubs, your flowers, your yard clippings, all of that stuff is not okay. If it's not food grade, they do not want it, because 9 times out of 10, it's going to have some sort of chemical on it. Even if you use Miracle-Gro, even if you are the most organic of people, they know and can assume that most folks are not, so they can't accept it there because they don't have the time to sort through what is organic and what is not, and what's been treated with pesticides and what is not. They kind of just have to assume that it's been treated with pesticides, because any of those chemicals will actually kill the microorganisms that are really, really crucial in making anaerobic digestion work. So at any rate, in addition to those, you of course wouldn't want to compost prescriptions or medical products anytime, but specifically in anaerobic digestion and industrial composting, that is also the case. Glass and metal are not okay. Like I said, they don't go through the processes or the machinery at all. So if you have food waste that's in glass, you have to empty that out into a bag or some sort. Rubber bands around your like for example, I had a batch of radishes that I wasn't able to eat that were wrapped up in a rubber band, and I had to take that rubber band off because those can get caught in the equipment and ruin some stuff. So you want to make sure all the rubber bands are off of your food. And of course, if you have any sort of cosmetic things, so if you have a tissue and you use it to like wipe your face or something, that's fine. But if you have a makeup wipe that has a whole bunch of stuff in it, they do not want that. So as long as you haven't added anything like nail polish remover or a face serum or anything to that napkin, that's fine. You can compost it. But if you have added any of those typically bathroom like cosmetic materials onto a facial tissue, they do not want that. And of course, in the time of 2020, you don't want to be composting your masks, your gloves, any sort of that type of equipment, anything that's been sprayed disinfectant, all of that is not okay in a composting situation, backyard or otherwise. And same goes for food, pet waste and animal and human waste, of course. But diapers also not compostable. We do get those sometimes. And I know that you have the very best intentions, but they are not compostable. You cannot do anything with your regular diapers. So I want to dive into compostable packaging. I strategically did not mention this in the do's and don'ts because they are very, very tricky. So on the end of anaerobic digestion, like you have in your backyard, there is a ratio of things that they have to deal with, right? And that's all because of the speed at which things degrade. So your green waste in your backyard takes longer than your brown waste to decompose. It's just a little bit further from that decomposition place. And so it takes longer for them to fully break down. The same goes for anything that looks and or acts like a plastic and says on it that is compostable or biodegradable. Those may very well be a bioplastic that's made out of starch and plastic and made to degrade, but it is going to take longer because it has plastic polymers in it. So that naturally just takes longer for them to degrade and decompose. That being said, the terms we have here on the left are very, very hard to control, and in fact, virtually impossible to control in terms of industry standards, marketing, all of those. Eco-friendly packaging, do not trust that. I wouldn't trust it with the life of anything, even a fly. That doesn't mean anything. It's very similar. Eco-friendly packaging and biodegradable, those two words as terms are very, very similar to natural and food. Like natural food could still be a bag of Lay's potato chips. Sure, at some point in time, you could trace that back to a potato, but it is not a natural food. And I think it's a little bit easier for us to discern that distinction in that case than it is with biodegradable, because I mean, none of us are perfect and none of us are experts in plastics, or most of us are not. And so who's to say what's biodegradable and what's not? That being said, we have found significant number of cases in which a company has labeled a product as biodegradable with an asterisk that says 2,000 years. You know, that of course is not ethical and it's not okay, but also not something that we have any way to control. So as consumers, I would love for you guys to take that in stride and just keep that in your back pocket for when you do come across these materials, because like I said, they are everywhere in the greater Portland area right now. So if you live in and around here, and even I was in Acadia and was finding them too. So in any of these places, they are just coming through all the time now. And so it's difficult. It's really difficult because there are a lot of products, specifically with the label of Greenware. That's a company that makes compostable plastics that are not labeled at all. They look exactly like your just standard plastic cup that you would get. I see them a lot with coffee right now, but also, I mean, any sort, especially now when they're giving you all of your mixed drinks or anything from a restaurant in a plastic cup to take with you when you go. All of those are subject to be bioplastics. So if you see on the bottom, the Chasing Arrows recycling symbol with the number 7 in it, I would say 9 times out of 10, that's a bioplastic. For now, we are accepting them at ecomaine. That is all being said. If we continue to get number 7 plastics, we probably will not be able to keep up with the amount that we're expecting to get. There is, like I said, an inundation of these materials right now. And I know that small businesses and large businesses are doing it with the very best intentions. They're trying to make the most eco-friendly choice. They're trying to increase their sustainability. That all being said, from the side of the people that have to accept those materials, we are not at a place in terms of composting and recycling to accept that amount of those materials. If that makes sense, to rephrase it in terms of composting, we do not have the 2/3 of the other stuff of your food waste and your cow manure. We don't have enough to balance that out with all of the plastics that we're getting, the bioplastics that we're getting. So I checked in a couple weeks ago at ecomaine. I had a brewery contact me because they were providing their customers with these plastic cups. And they wanted to know if the folks that we contracted with at ecomaine to do food waste would accept them. And so I went through the process of getting in touch with our friends over at AgriCycle to ask them a bit more about these materials. And what I got back was, sure, in theory, these cups are compostable. And even these symbols here on the right are the ones that mean that they're okay to put into an anaerobic digester. They can still have that symbol on them, and they might not fully break down in the process of being in those red buildings with the microorganisms and all of that stuff for weeks at a time. Even heated to 140 degrees, it just might not happen. And it all has to do with the ratio on that given set of time in terms of how much plastics there are to other material. It has to do with that certain batch of plastic, how much of the starch is there and how much of the plastic is there. That's variable. There's so much to do with it. And specifically in terms of their depackager machine, it's very hard for them, of course, to distinguish on the fly which is a regular plastic and which is a bioplastic. So I would generally say if you're throwing in those cups into your industrial compost, I would be safe to assume that they're not getting composted, which is super frustrating. As a consumer, that really bums me out. And it also really bums me out to see that small businesses are continuing to use them, and large businesses. I mean, like I said, Dunkin' Donuts is starting to use what they're calling biodegradable straws. Like I said, biodegradable is not a word that you want to rely on. So there isn't any information for me to learn more about that to mean if they actually mean that they're compostable straws, in which case I also want to dive into another issue. So if we as business owners and as communities are investing into compostable packaging, we first have to invest into the technology and the capacity and the food waste on the other side of that to balance that out, right? You can't invest in the product without first investing in the end of life of that product, right? So especially, we're seeing this a lot, which is very, very disheartening. These companies are providing compostable cups and then not providing composting to their consumers. And this dives into a whole nother issue, which is very heightened and very much on our minds right now. How can you assume as a business, as a coffee shop, for example, if you're providing your customers with a compostable cup that is only compostable in industrial composting, because these bioplastics need that heat to compost and to biodegrade, how can you assume that they have the financial resources to have that composting as an option? In a lot of places, the municipality is not yet capable of paying for that composting option. So like in the greater Portland area, it's mostly curbside in which you have to pay for that subscription, which is a privilege, right? It comes with higher socioeconomic status. It comes with everything else we're talking in terms of racial privilege right now. And so it's very disheartening to see folks providing these compostable packaging and products to their consumers without providing them a way to dispose of them. So that's my spiel. We are trying very hard over at ecomaine to create a guide for small business owners to kind of navigate these markets of packaging, because I know it's very, very challenging. These companies are not forthright with what their products are capable with the end of life of their products, let's say. So if you happen to be a small business owner, first, I thank you for being here. But secondly, I think that it would be safest right now to go with a #1 PET recyclable plastic. And I can dive into more what that means if you are interested. But we know that we have a recycling industry for recyclable plastics. We do not know right now. We are totally in the dark as to whether these cups and these recyclable products are getting, our compostable products are actually completely composting, even if they're getting in the process at all. So really, to be entirely realistic, if you have these compostable cups, the safest thing is to throw them in the trash, because on our end, yes, we are selecting them and sorting them with our other recyclables, but we currently, they truly are not recyclable, right? So they have starch in them, and to make a new recyclable material, you have to chop the plastic up and then you melt it down. In that melting down process, I don't think that they hold up enough to actually be fully recyclable. That all being said, like I said, if we start to get a lot more of these recyclable, compostable bioplastics, we're not going to be able to recycle them. And so we're going to have to face some decisions down the line as to what we do about that. But in the meantime, if you're getting them at a coffee shop, you can recycle them. I would say it would be safer to recycle them than just throw them in the trash. But honestly, it probably is the safest thing to throw them in the trash, unfortunately, at this time. So I just wanted to make you all very much aware of that whole spiel. I know it's a lot to process and a lot of information, but we're navigating it right along with you. And as consumers, I would really implore you to empower yourself with the knowledge to make those decisions, because the industry and the market is constantly changing. Compost and recycling are constantly evolving and changing, and it can be really hard to keep up. But that all being said, we are here over at ecomaine to help you with those questions. So if you ever have any questions about those, please don't hesitate to let us know through phone or email or anything. Our website also has a questions page if you guys have questions. So I promised you guys ways to dispose of your industrial compost. Like I said, would very much love to see that in Gray-New Gloucester, but at this time it is not yet available. These locations are from our website. This is all being said, I would say that a lot of these are safe to say would be at a transfer station, which typically are reserved for residents. But I can tell you that Scarborough has locations to drop off that are open to the public. They are not restricted by residential requirements. So if you are a very due diligent composter and would like to contribute to composting, there are locations in Scarborough on this map, which is on our website, that you can find there. You are more than welcome to try and go, for example, to Brownfield or to another transfer station and see if you can drop them off there. But I wouldn't say it's a guarantee. I will say though, on a statewide level, the Maine DEP keeps track of the amount of trash, recycling, and compost that towns are creating and generating every year. And towns do get more funds from the state the more they divert from trash. So the more they recycle and the more they compost, they get more funds from the state. That all being said, these towns do have a little bit of an incentive to accept compost from folks that they know are going to compost the right way and divert that, because it increases that tonnage for them. So at any rate, I digress, but I wanted you to know that this is here, and you are more than welcome to call these transfer stations or to head over there and see if those are places that they'll allow you to drop off your compost if they happen to be like in your daily, your path along the way. And like I said, I wanted to revisit this a little bit and make sure, I know a lot of things around the environmental scene and climate change and all of those can be really disheartening, and they never leave you with something that you can actively do in your home. So even if you don't have industrial composting at your disposal, you can still take action in terms of your waste, right? I think that waste is one of the most powerful ways to impact your climate, your carbon footprint, because it is so in your control. It is completely in your control. And so I would really implore you to start doing a waste audit in your home. That would be really just looking at your waste. So sometimes you have to like dump it out onto a tarp, and you would really take stock of what you could have that you could compost in your backyard, what you have you could compost industrially, what is recyclable that you accidentally threw in the trash, what could be used again by yourself or by somebody else that you accidentally threw in the trash. And typically what it will boil down to is these non-recyclable plastic packaging, like I mentioned, the biohazards and the pet waste, and in most cases pet food bags will also all be in your trash. If you're able to completely source out your food waste. If not, it would definitely include your animal waste and your animal food waste and those types of products that are not compostable in your backyard. So I also wanted to leave this here for you all to kind of give you a little bit of fire in terms of why this is important. The average US citizen does contribute 219 pounds of food waste to landfills annually. This is not speaking specifically, well, that's not true. I would say it does encompass what is sent to waste to energy in terms of like our process. That is not considered composting, which in some scenes it is, but it is not in Maine. And so all of that would be contributed to this amount here. Like I said, that might not be in your case. You might be more frugal with the amount of leftovers that you throw out or food that you throw out, period. But in general, the average is about 219 pounds of food per person. That's per person in your household. So you multiply that by how many people you have, and it can just add up really quickly. And like I said, on our end of things, we would love to not be getting your food waste at ecomaine. We would really love to see that composted, because our fires would burn more efficiently, and the towns and the municipalities, so Gray, for example, that's paying us to dispose of their trash, even though they're an owner community, they still have to pay us for the tonnage. It's just at a lower rate. But at any rate, they're paying us for that tonnage. And of course, if we take out the food waste, that tonnage is going to be so much lighter, because that trash that encompasses food waste as well is so much heavier. When you take out the food of your trash, it's a little bit different if you have diapers in there, because those of course are heavy too. But really, when you just have your pet waste bags and your plastic packaging and a few other miscellaneous items in your trash, it is not very heavy. And if we think about doing that on a large scale, town-wide, we would just have much, much less of our taxes going to the processing of our trash and our MSW, as we call it, our municipal solid waste. So that is why this really hits home and is something that is entirely in your power as a household, but also as citizens in your town. You have ways to get more involved and to really help. In Gray, we're hoping to have a Reduce the Wet Waste campaign coming soon to empower folks to do more to help us reduce that, so that our taxes can be diverted to other things that are much more important to us as a community. And of course, before you throw something out, before you buy your groceries, and before you fill your plate, take a second to pause and think about the waste hierarchy and what that food or that recyclable product or that packaging that you're going to have to throw in the trash, where that's going to end up. If you're able to take that pause, it'll be easier if you do that before you buy it, before you fill your plate, before it even enters your house, and much easier for you to dispose of those items down the line. So with that, we can move to questions. I know I let a few stack up here in the chat box really quickly. So let's see. How is Gray doing for recycling in other communities? We are actually working on this right now. Over at ecomaine, we have what we call a community comparison tool, which combines all of the towns, well, all of our ecomaine communities we are in contact with, and we annually get the amount of tonnage they have for trash and recycling and for food waste. And we kind of use that to allow folks, residents, it's public information, to compare and contrast what's working in certain towns and what's not. That being said, Gray has an advantage over other towns because they have a mandatory recycling clause in their town legislature. So I would, generally speaking, say that it's probably higher because of that. But I can't present that data to you yet because we haven't analyzed it yet for this year. So we do have a bit harder of a time looking at the numbers for Gray and comparing them to other towns because they are outside of the ecomaine system. And when you're outside of that single sort system, it's just different. Being source separated like you are at the transfer station, it's a bit harder for us to keep track of where things are at. So let's see, Lacey responded and said that Gray is really good, but there definitely is room to educate. Generally speaking, I would say there's always room to educate as an educator. Maybe that's just job security, but I would say generally speaking, like I said, these markets for recyclable products and compostable products and all of those things are constantly evolving. So there's almost always room to educate and questions that need answered in terms of composting. But yes, Gray does have a recyclopedia, just like we do have at ecomaine, that is customized to what they do take over at the transfer station. So if you ever have any doubts or hesitations about what could be compostable, I would check there first. So if anybody has any other questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. And if you'd like to come off mute and answer them with your voice, that's more than tired. I am more than tired. You're more than welcome to do that. Well, thank you, Wayne. I really appreciate that. I'm certainly passionate about trash or waste, if you will. And I really love sharing these topics with others. All right, well, hold on one second here. I'm really grateful for you all for joining me tonight. If you do come across any questions, here, let me switch the slide here. We are more than welcome to answer them for you. That number will go directly to us educators, and you are able to leave us a voicemail or get one of us right on the phone, and we can kind of help you navigate a particular product you might want to recycle. Even if it's in Gray, we can still help you out with that. Or if you have composting or waste questions, or like hazardous waste, metal waste, those types of things that aren't in your normal recycling or household waste, we can also help you out with those. And also, we have an email. If you'd like to just shoot us an email, you can do that too. And follow. We do frequently post on social media different waste tips and recycling tips. But here, I'm going to circle back to a quick question here. Glass recycling is actually really, really interesting right now. And we had a quick question come in asking if other towns are recycling glass. So glass is really hard because it's heavy, very heavy. And it actually is really hard to recycle glass because it takes a lot of heat to melt it down and make it into something new, a lot more heat than a plastic would because it's just a much more dense product. That all being said, folks that are recycling with us at ecomaine do have glass recycling. We are still recycling glass, not really in the traditional sense. We shatter the glass ourselves into a fine dust, and we store that dust aggregate mix at our landfill, and it is free for the public and our ecomaine community members to use for fill in construction and a few other processes there. But it technically is not really truly recycled. We're not making new glass products out of it. We're using that for construction mostly. It also can be used as countertops. All of our countertops at ecomaine are made from our recycled bottles, and it can be really pretty. But that being said, the best use for our glass over at ecomaine is in construction. But you also may have seen commercials. I don't have cable, so I don't know what capacity, but we keep getting comments about commercials on TV, I think, or some sort of news story about how glass is not being recycled. That is not at all sponsored by us at ecomaine. We are still, like I said, recycling glass. I believe that this glass is coming from, commercial is coming from the town of Brunswick. They're not an ecomaine community, and they do something similar to what we do here in Gray. And they have stopped recycling glass, much like Gray has, because of the cost, because it's very, very heavy. So if you don't live in Gray, I think most of us here live in Gray. I would very much encourage you to contact your town and get to know, unless you know that you're composting with recycling with ecomaine, in which case you're good to go. That being said, like I mentioned, Gray is not recycling glass. I would reuse it in any way possible, even if, like, I use a glass jar to scoop my dog's food. You know, even in those small ways, if you're able to reuse it to divert it from the landfill, or keep the jar. You never know what you might need it down the road. I personally put all my leftovers in glass jars and so on. So I would keep them before you throw them out, because they are just going to go into a landfill, unfortunately. But at any rate, Wayne asked where you can get the glass fill. Give us a call over at ecomaine. It is located over at our landfill, but I think to pick up and to acquire some yourself, we do have to do a little bit of coordination just to make sure we're not doing a project over at the landfill in the time that you're coming. And the roads are a little bit shady over there, so we want to make sure that the roads are good for travel. So give us a call, and we can be sure to hook you up with some of that stuff. But at any rate, I heard that glass can be used at, it's not completely as asphalt, but they mix it in with asphalt to kind of use less asphalt and more glass. Basically, it makes it cheaper. It's more of like a filler in that sense. I'm actually going to a conference soon on that topic. But that all being said, it's still in the research stage. They're still doing testing on how long that glass road aggregate lasts. And what it looks like, especially in Maine. I think most of the research is happening in North Conway. They want to know what happens over the winter when there's glass in the asphalt, and just to make sure that long term there's nothing weird that happens with age and such. So it's in the works. We're hoping very much down the line. That would be huge if we're able to divert that much glass to asphalt production. That would significantly help, I think, with the local use of glass, recycling of glass, because it really is the transportation cost to get it to the facility that does the recycling. So if we're able to use it locally for other things, I think it would make a huge difference. But I'm going to leave it a little bit just to see if anybody else has any other questions. But like I said, our resources here are always open to you to have any other questions answered. We do have our Recyclopedia online. Gray has one as well. If you have questions on our ecomaine Recyclopedia, there's a page that you can add an item and it'll just go to us and we'll do the work for you. I don't know if Gray has that and if they do, where it goes. But if there is an item specifically that you'd like to know, we can do the research there for you. So it seems like that might be it in terms of questions. If that is the case, I'm going to pop out of here, but I really am grateful that you all joined me tonight and are willing to learn about these things along with us here. And again, please reach out if you have any questions. We'd love to answer them. So thank you so much for joining us and have a great night, folks.